Hey everybody, Christopher Wing here, back again, and I'm continuing my story of my trip around the world to visit every Disney theme park on Earth in under 80 hours. When I last left off, I had just flown from Orlando to Paris. I had some near misses with my connection in Newark and forgetting my iPad on a plane and all sorts of fun stuff. But as you can see, I've got my Disneyland Paris 15th anniversary t-shirt on today, so it's time to talk about Disneyland Paris. Or as I used to know it, Euro Disney. The park has actually undergone a few name changes over time, and I just remembered there was a piece of interesting ephemera that I forgot to mention when I did my Disney theme park tickets video. So I thought I would bring this out and show you right here. That's actually one of my favorite things that I have. So this is a ticket from the opening day of Euro Disney. Disneyland Paris actually opened on April 12th of 1992. And it was not Disney's first park abroad because Tokyo Disneyland had opened in 1983, but it was their first park or their only park in Europe at the time, and it was interesting about kind of how it came to be. So when Disney was, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, they were actually doing quite well. The time was right, I think, to revise some plans that had been long dormant to build a park in Europe. Now, when it came time to figure out where they were going to build the park, there were pretty much two options that they narrowed it down to. One was outside of Paris. The other one was on the coast of Spain, just outside of Barcelona. And you may be wondering to yourself, hey, I wonder what ever happened to that Spain property. Did somebody else buy it? Did they ever build a theme park there? And the answer to both questions is yes. So you may remember in the last video when I was talking about the Magic Kingdom, that Disney very nearly built Walt Disney World in St. Louis, Missouri as part of a deal with Anheuser-Busch. Anheuser-Busch, by the way, decided not to do that deal for various reasons, but they did buy the parcel of land that Disney took a pass on the coast of Spain, and they built a theme park, and that theme park was called Port Aventura. And it opened in 1995. 2 years later, in 1997, Universal bought it from Anheuser-Busch so that it became Universal Port Aventura. And they ran it for quite a few years until 2004 when it was sold to a financial conglomerate, and they're basically the people running it today. But it's still there. You can still go see it. Check it out on Google Earth if you want. It actually looks like a very cool theme park, and hopefully someday I'll get to visit it. But in any event, Disney decided for whatever reason to go with France instead of Spain, and this had pluses and minuses. The plus was France is kind of more centrally located in Europe, and so it's easy to get to for more countries, so they figured, we'll get more people from all around the continent to come here because it'll be easy to get to. But on the other hand, the weather isn't quite as good in France. It does snow in the winter, so that was kind of a minus. And B, the French didn't love all things Mickey in the same way that, say, the Japanese did or the Americans did. Quite famously, when it was first announced in the French press, the kind of cultural guardians of France were saying, like, oh, this is going to be a cultural Chernobyl, which is a pretty memorable thing to say. And in fact, a lot of people were kind of freaking out over the idea of, Disney and France. It just doesn't really seem like these two things kind of go together very well. And I was looking through my clips the other day, and I came across this article from California Magazine in 1990. Unfortunately, it's 2 pages, so I had to rip it out of the magazine, so it's not all one thing. But I will put this up on Instagram as well. It's a very funny kind of editorial cartoon that shows what you would expect to see of the cigarette smoking kind of snide guy, with a Mickey name tag on that says Pierre. It looks like he just can't be bothered. Some people have said that the actual cast members aren't terribly much better, but I've actually had really good experiences with most of the cast members that I've had at Disneyland Paris. So when Disney chose France over Spain, part of the deal was they got a really great kind of deal from the French government, where the French government would agree to lower a lot of taxes and give them a lot of free rides on stuff and commit some resources and funding towards building and infrastructure and build out the high-speed rail station right to the front door, basically, of Disneyland Paris and so forth. So it probably was a smart decision in the end, but it took a long time for them to be able to actually realize the benefit of that location. So even Disney's Imagineers had a lot of challenges to face with the park in France. Would certain things translate to the French culture? And what do you do with all the languages? I mean, Europe has a bajillion languages. I mean, there's English, French, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, German, Romanian, you take your pick, Polish. All these people are going to be coming from all over and they all speak their own language. How is that going to work? Especially on rides where telling a story, like literally vocally telling a story, is such an important part of the ride, like, say, the Jungle Cruise. And some of these problems, I don't think they really came up with a satisfactory answer to. So as a result, there's no Jungle Cruise in Disneyland Paris, because how would you do it? You'd have to have a separate line for every language. It would just be a nightmare. So as a result, there were a lot of really interesting things about Disneyland Paris that make it very unique that don't exist anywhere else. Like, for example, what is the castle going to look like? How do you build a castle in a country where there are castles all over the place? Real, actual, legitimate castles within 20 minutes driving distance. So for a while, they actually thought of putting in some like crazy, weird modern architecture as the centerpiece of the theme park where the castle would be. Thankfully, they decided not to do that. There were some other changes in Disneyland Paris that you can see as well. For example, there's no Tomorrowland. Instead, it's called Discoveryland. And part of the idea there was that Tomorrowland is always a problem in the American theme parks because technology moves so quickly now that no matter what you dream up as like, ooh, this is the world of tomorrow, it's probably going to be obsolete by the time that you finish putting the paint on. So they decided to get around that by kind of creating a kind of whimsical Jules Verne sci-fi kind of retro future look in Disneyland Paris, and they called it Discoveryland instead of Tomorrowland, just to drive the point home. That did lead to some slight problems though, so when they built Space Mountain, they decided they'd try to theme it into the land and call it Discovery Mountain. No, they realized that that was actually a horrible name and made no sense. And so they quickly changed the name back to Space Mountain. But the stamp that says DM is still there on the side of the train cars. Incidentally, their Space Mountain is also pretty unique because it's the only version of Space Mountain in the Disney universe that shoots you up on the outside of the attraction, and then you kind of dive in through the top of the cone of the building. And then once you're inside, it's a much more turbulent and violent ride because it actually loops and goes upside down in the dark, which is the only version of Space Mountain that does that as well. Now, when I arrived at the park, I actually got there before park opening, and I had done a little bit of research online to figure out that you could actually get into early entry into the theme park if you had an annual pass. But nobody could seem to tell me if you could buy an annual pass the day of and use it to get in the park immediately, or if you had to wait until the regular park hours and then get the annual pass to go inside. Because when you buy an annual pass at Disneyland Paris, you don't actually get it right away. You get a paper voucher, which then you have to go to an annual pass office, which is only inside the theme park. So I'm happy to report that you could actually buy the voucher and get into the park. So that was no problem. The only bad thing about that was, first of all, the annual pass office didn't open until the park opened, which is at 10 a.m. So I got into the park at about 8:30, but I couldn't actually leave the park until after I had gotten my annual pass, which would be after 10. And I had to be on the train back to the airport at 11. So that didn't give me a lot of time in the second park. The other interesting thing about early entry at Disneyland Paris is they don't open the entire park. They basically only open Main Street and Fantasyland and Discoveryland, or Tomorrowland, if you will. So some of the things that I would have loved to experience, like Phantom Manor, or their version of Pirates of the Caribbean, which is very different from ours, I wasn't able to experience those things. So again, in my quest to ride something that was unique to each park, in the sections of the park that were open at the time, there really wasn't a lot that was actually that unique. So one of the things that they did have was an attraction underneath the castle. There is a cavern, and in the cavern is a real life-size, like full Game of Thrones style dragon underneath there, and it kind of moves around and breathes smoke, and every once in a while kind of roar to life. It's a really cool thing to see. I mean, it's not really an attraction in the sense of like it's not a ride or anything, or a show even, but hey, it's listed as an attraction on the map, so that worked for me. So anyways, I could have probably gone on more attractions, except it suddenly dawned on me that I really need to make sure that I am first in line for that annual pass window, because, you know, if I get in line behind like a family with like 5 kids or something, it's going to take forever to get them through to get to me, and by that time it's going to be too late and I won't have any time to go to the second park. So I kind of forgoed, I don't know. I didn't go anyway on any other rides at that time, so that I could make sure that I was first in line to get my annual pass. And then a funny thing happened when I was getting my annual pass. They happened to notice that I was wearing a sweatshirt from Disneyland. And they're like, "Oh, have you been to Disneyland?" And I'm like, "Yeah, funny thing about that, I was there just a few hours ago." And so I handed them a little card that I had made up to kind of explain to people what I was doing. And she calls her supervisor over, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, this is really cool that you're doing this. Hey, you know, we would love to give you a token of our, you know, appreciation and well wishes for your trip." And I thought, oh, well, maybe they'll give me another pin or something like that. And they said, well, you know, we could give you something like that, or, you know, we could also give you food item or some coffee. And I'm like, you know, at this point in the morning, I have had hardly anything to eat. I would love to have a cup of coffee. That would be perfect. And so I thought they would just go in the back and like get me a cup of coffee from the office or something, but no, they bring out this huge kind of binder with triplicate forms, and they fill out the triplicate forms, and it takes forever. And what they're giving me is a voucher that I can go redeem for a free cup of coffee at one of the restaurants. And as soon as I realized this, I kind of want to say, like, look, I appreciate the gesture, but I just do not have time for this. But of course, I don't want to be, you know, ungracious. So I just sit there and I'm looking at my watch and I'm looking at the time ticking by, and it's almost now half past, because you know, it took a while to get the whole annual pass, because they got to take your picture, they got to laminate the card and everything. So, you know, by the time that we're done with this, now it's like half past, and I'm like, now I only have 30 minutes in the next park. So, you know, I'm very gracious. I say thank you very much for this. I'll see what I can do to redeem this. And I rush out the door, and I'm leaving, and I realize that there is one other attraction on my list that is unique to Disneyland Paris, and it's something I'd probably be able to do very quickly, which is the Mysteries of the Nautilus. So long time ago in California, the original Disneyland, they had a really tough time filling in Tomorrowland. It was kind of the land that time and money forgot. And in fact, there's a very funny cartoon that was in one of the company newsletters that basically has a guy walking past a coming soon sign outside of Tomorrowland, and the guy's like, well, that's why we call it Tomorrowland, you know. So they were kind of desperate to put anything in there, and there were all these horrible things that got put into Tomorrowland when it first opened at Disneyland in 1955, and shortly thereafter, things like the Dutch Boy Paint Color Gallery and the Kaiser Hall of Aluminum Fame and the Crane Bathroom of Tomorrow, and all of these horrible attractions. But one thing that they managed to stick in there as a temporary space filler were the sets from the recently completed movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And again, it was just meant to be like something to fill the space for now. It doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with Tomorrowland, but you know, hey, it works, stick it in. It turned out that that ended up being very, very popular and was actually there for quite a very long time before it got cleared away to make room for Adventure Through Outer Space, which then got cleared away to make room for Star Tours. But I think that Disney has always enjoyed this idea of being able to walk through the Nautilus. So when they decided to plus up Discoveryland in Disneyland Paris, one of the things they added was a walkthrough attraction of the Nautilus submarine from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Anyways, I was able to see that attraction in about 5 minutes. I recommend, by the way, if you go, that you take longer and really look at all the incredible detail that's there. But unfortunately, I was on a time crunch, so I did that, got to check it off the list, and then ran down Main Street, out the front gates, over to the second park, which is Walt Disney Studios Paris, and that is where we will pick up on the next installment of this rather whirlwind now trip around the world to visit every Disney theme park on Earth in under 80 hours. If you want to read more about it, please check out my other videos on YouTube. I'm on Instagram at Mouse Around the World, and Twitter, MouseATW, and you can always find all of this and more on mousearoundtheworld.com. So until next time, I will see you soon.